Today is October 26, 2007. This is Lynda Wright. We're at Randolph-Macon College in our Macon Memories Project.
Hi, this is R.D. Ward. I taught music here for 41 years, and sitting to my right is a very exemplary example, to be a little redundant, of what Randolph-Macon can do at its best. May I introduce Professor Alva Hughes. She teaches psych or something spooky.
Thank you, Buster, for the introduction. I am Alva Hughes, and I do teach psychology, although I don't think it's spooky. And I graduated from Randolph-Macon in 1981, and then I came back in 1991 to join the faculty. And so Buster and I are going to be talking about, I'm not sure what we're going to be talking about, but it'll have something to do with Randolph-Macon and probably something to do with music, since my memories of Randolph-Macon are largely tied to, at least as a student, to being a member of the choir, and Buster was our choir director for several of those years. So I'm going to start by asking Buster how he ended up at Randolph-Macon. So how did you come to be on the faculty here?
I was at the University of Illinois doing my master's degree in music, and my wife at the time sent out a bunch of letters of application to just a bunches of school, just a bunch. And one of them was to Randolph-Macon. When I finished my degree at Illinois in the spring of 1958, I didn't have a job for the fall, and so I was still looking. I was offered 2 jobs. Who knows which one was the correct decision? One was with a high school band, and one was at Randolph-Macon. Now, how I got the Randolph-Macon invitation, I'm not too sure. I was told that somebody had donated a few bucks to the college to start a full-time music teaching position. The president at the time, J. Earl Moreland, a wonderful gentleman, knew some people in the Richmond area who were prominent in music, including one of our own professors, Edgar McDonald, who knew everybody in the world in music. And so when getting my application, J. Earl talked to Edgar McDonald, and Edgar said, I'll investigate it, and I got an interview and got the job. And it was Edgar who taught English, who sort of escorted me around. And so I got the job. It paid a couple $100 more than the job at the high school. So that's how it started. That was the fall of 1958, and I stayed on here for 41 years, retiring at the end of the 98-99 school year, right? So that's it. I don't know what all that information really means, but that's it. I'm not too sure the significance of all of this.
Well, at least now I know how you got here. Once you found yourself at Randolph-Macon, at this small liberal arts college deep in the South, what did you make of it? What did you find easy and fun and exciting about being on the faculty here, and what did you find challenging?
Well, I had absolutely no qualms about going to a small liberal arts school. Neither did I have any apprehension about it being an all-men's school at the time. It didn't bother me. I had known of the school because one of my main teachers at the University of Richmond, where I did my undergraduate work, Mark Troxell, was a graduate of Randolph-Macon and a splendid choral and instrumental man. He was a trumpet player, and my experience was both in instrumental and choral So maybe that helped when J. Earl was looking for somebody, since I was neither fish nor fowl, or both, depending on how you look at it. And also the choral director, the main choral director before I came, was University of Richmond graduate, but taught just the men's glee club. Did for a number of years. That's Charles Troxell. Has been recently and justifiably feted. Is that how you pronounce that word? On the campus by his many years of good work at the college as the men's glee club director. And so I knew a little bit of the choral program through the Troxell family. And I don't know whether it was when you were here or later, Alva, that we had a Voices of the Past concert with Bill Troxell, Mark Troxell, and their father, who did the choral work way back into the First World War and the 20s and so forth. So, having learned from the Troxell family, I felt it appropriate, while they were all alive and kicking, to to have a little Voices of the Past, or whatever we call it. Each of them directed some stuff, and then we all got together, and it was an important occasion. We're glad because some of those characters are gone. Bill is still around, as vibrant as ever. That was much too long an answer to a very easy question. Make it simpler next time.
Well, as a faculty member, what were some of the challenges that you faced in music or just being on the faculty at Randolph-Macon?
Challenges sounds like a politically correct word for problems.
Okay, go with problems.
And I can't think of any problems. My mama said, God rest her soul, she said to me, Buster, that's my nickname, all of your problems are either small or of your own making. So I cannot say that Randolph-Macon gave me any problems. The challenges were to keep the number of people, young guys in the glee club who could sing well. That's always been a problem at a small school like ours. And there was a challenge in that a small school rarely provided enough instrumentalists to form a decent-sized band. An orchestra was out of the question. So we had a small instrumental group. Sometimes it was quite good. Sometimes it was understaffed. That's a good way to put it. And when we went co-ed in the 70s, I had a first open rehearsal for the pep band. And in walked just a room full of women flute players. Now, what in your world are you going to do with all the chick flute players, right? And so that was the problem, maintaining an instrumental program. Sometimes it was good, sometimes it wasn't. So at least I have to thank the powers that be for even trying. And so, but we had some good times. The pep band had a reputation of being slightly, what's the word? Obnoxious. For instance, we had a couple tunes that we held in abeyance for special times. If there was a fight among the athletes, we would crank up, this can't be love because I feel this way, and songs of that sort. And we had a whole series of those. When we first came here, the basketball team played their games in that real old gym. I don't know, is it still around? What do they use it for? Anyway.
The oldest one's not there anymore.
Anyway, it was, and we didn't seat many people, and the pep band always cranked up behind the opposing bench. And when the opposing players would come over during timeouts, we cranked up as loud as we could just to disturb them. And eventually, they asked us to move to a less obnoxious place. Hugh Stevens was the athletic director, and they finally, Paul Webb asked Hugh, who asked me. All sterling men, great faith. So we did have some fun. Sometimes we take ourselves too seriously.
One of the things I remember from my time in the choir was that we did trips. So we had a kind of a spring concert tour. How did that start, the traveling with the choir?
Well, it was supposed to be a plum to be able to get away for a weekend from the campus at campus expense, and they'd always done it. I think it must be a tradition with undergraduate choral groups in the United States to tour. It's good publicity for the college, so they said. I don't know how they could prove that, but we had a good time. Sometimes we had a short trip. We called them short pump specials because that was as far as we got. And Short Pump is now a huge place, but still only a half an hour away. And there was a little Methodist church there, and sometimes that's as far as we got. We did get as far as Nassau once, and Florida. We took some extensive tours, but they were expensive, and so we had to work those out carefully at moderate expense. We always had a rule of thumb that we could take no more than what one bus load would take. We couldn't afford 2 buses. Alva, what do you remember most about your choral days?
I guess it's actually the relationships. Truthfully, there are still some songs that play in the back of my head sometimes that I learned while I was in choir here. And so some of the music still sticks with me, but what's most important is the relationships. The choir was a really close-knit group, and some of my best friends from Randolph-Macon that I'm still friends with are people that I met in choir because we were going to rehearsals a couple times a week, and then we'd end up sitting together in the dining hall. And I can't imagine what my Randolph-Macon experience would have been without that group of people to be close to and to kind of help me figure out how you make it through a Randolph-Macon education. So it was important.
What tunes do you remember? I can't remember them.
I was afraid he was going to ask me that question. I'm not going to sing, so I won't have. But there were some lullabies that we learned. There were also some kind of popular tunes from, I think it was probably the 40s that we did one year as part of the tour. Some of them are kind of World War II popular songs. I remember those. And then we did some kind of older tunes that are kind of like madrigals, and a few of those still stick in my head. And the blues. I can remember being in a choir rehearsal up in Old Chapel, and we were supposed to be singing some kind of jazzy, bluesy songs, and Buster was very unhappy because we just weren't giving him the emotion he was looking for, and there were several kind of biting remarks about our lack of kind of soul and emotion as we were not getting, we weren't doing the blues quite the way the blues were supposed to be done. So Duke Ellington would not have been pleased with us is part of what he let us know. But the music's important too. I love the music. So, and speaking of the music, I know you've also done some arranging and composing of the songs that you arranged and composed at Randolph-Macon. Which ones are most important to you? And there's one I'm going to ask you about if it doesn't come up.
What's that? Ask me.
An affectionate verb.
Oh, gracious. Well, you do go back. Yes, yeah. I think, if I'm not mistaken, that was done for the inauguration of Liddell Payne, correct? One of the recent presidents. And I loved the text because it was sort of both affectionate and non-affectionate, ending with the presidential smile and with that word. So and it had, is that the piece where I had piped in music from the ceiling? All right, so it was a multimedia effect, and we had piped in music, carefully chosen bloop, bleep, squeak, squawk, electronic stuff bombarding the crowd. And we had the brass group in the pit playing stuff, and the carillon was playing, and we were singing and playing with percussion instruments. It was really an event, as they call it. I had a couple people who said, "What was that?" They said, "What was that?" I think they expected something Handelian, and it was about this time, when we had been rehearsing this thing for a while, that I was informed that the college had commissioned somebody to write a piece. And I got this sort of neo-Handelian piece just a couple days before the event, as if that's the way life was. So I was embarrassed. I don't know. Anyway, so a lot of people thought it inappropriate. I got one nice note from Tom Porter saying, "Thanks for the," I forget what the words, it was just "thanks for the attempt at being modern," or something like that. And so that was a fun time. I used to do a lot of crazy things, and I think being at a school where this was possible was important to me. What do you think about how the old chapel looks now?
Well, it's interesting. They renovated the old chapel. I'm going to get the years wrong. I don't know, maybe 3 years ago, 4 years ago. And I'm glad that they kept part of the character. So the stained glass windows are still there, and so that means a lot to me. And at least upstairs still feels like old chapel, but I miss having the practice rooms there in the same way, although music is still there. And there used to be a theater that was downstairs, and the theater has been moved. And so just in terms of nostalgia, I miss the way Old Chapel used to be. But I think they've actually done a nice job of renovating and making it useful for what they need at the moment. And I'm glad they didn't tear it down. Renovation was much better than starting from scratch. So I'm happy about that. That's good. You mentioned that when you came to Randolph-Macon, it was all male.
Right.
And I know in the 70s that changed. And other than flutes, what else can you tell us about the change, the admission of women?
Well, from a choral standpoint, I talked about choral standpoint. We had a men's group, and we had these women on the campus, some of whom wanted to sing, but we didn't have enough women from which to choose to find some good singers. How many were in that first class of women? 50. And, of course, to find 20 good singers out of 50 is not statistically probable, as they say. So what we did for a couple of years, we kept the men's glee club, and then we had another group, often called in the business a town and gown group, students and local women, right, who wanted to sing with a mixed group. So we had that for a couple of years while the number of female students increased. giving me a larger number to choose from. And so eventually there was enough women on the campus that we could get what they call a mixed chorus. In the business, SATB, soprano, alto, tenor, bass. And so, and then after that became established, we decided, for better, for worse, who knows, that the days of a men's glee club were over, because we certainly did not have enough singers on our campus to do two groups well. If we'd had enough men to sing the men's glee club stuff, plus enough men to cooperate in a mixed group, I think we'd have done it. But I guess it's largely my decision. You go with what you can do, and our campus has never been, huge. So about one out of every 40, 50, 60 people is eligible, would have the interest in the talent. I forget, there are numbers on that, but they bored me then, and they still do. So, right. So we had a good time. Most of the stuff dealing with these interviews, these discussions, basically is what was happening then and what are the changes that have happened. How do I view those changes? You have your own ideas. I keep coming back to a quote from the long poem by Stephen Vincent Benet called John Brown's Body, in which there's this line that, let's see if I can get it right without messing it up too much. Only a fool goes looking for the wind that blew across his heartstrings yesterday. Right?
Very nice.
Right. And so we old fogies, we belong to the BOOF group, burned out old fogies, called boofs, right? And there are other F words one can put in there too, but fogies will do. So it's very easy for us boofs to lament what we notice today. But you have to keep in mind, it's a fool to go looking for something that motivated you, in this case, almost 50 years ago. But there is another side to that. Am I being philosophical? It's not like me at all. Only a fool goes looking for that wind, but the greater fools are those who don't remember it. People who embrace change just because they think all change is progress, and all progress means change. I'm not so wise as to know the difference, nor do I particularly care about ruminating about it. So things are different now. You know the changes since you belong to our hoary past. Spell that word correctly, please. And yet you're here dealing with whatever Randolph-Macon is dealing with now. You can't always believe what you read in the publications. So go for it, Alva. The college depends upon you and your ilk.
I don't think I'm willing to take the complete responsibility for what happens to Randolph-Macon, but I suppose I thank you for the for at least attempting to give me the responsibility.
If not you, who?
I'm hoping there's a savior in the wings that's going to step in and make it.
To save the day.
Exactly. Superman is probably on the way as we speak. If you think about the changes that you don't necessarily want to, you said you're not sure that it's possible to say which changes are good and which changes are bad. But if you had to think about a change that you regret the most, or think about something that you miss the most, what would it be?
I regret Elvis Presley because he was the beginning of the downfall of all American mores and good right thinking. Since him, the civilization has gone down the tube. Okay? That was an easy question. What was the other part of the question?
I want to stick with Elvis. Why Elvis?
Stop it, Alva. Alva, you put me on the spot. You're calling my BS what it is. No, just the general relaxations of, to me, and this is the part that I was referring to in my quote from Benet, that the role of what you and I might call serious classical music, particularly in college and high school choral programs, is way down the tubes. The same is true I did church work for a while, as you might remember. Same is true there, where if they can't scream and holler and wave their hands and scream exalt, 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 they think that they're going to hell. So it's tough being a musician today. There's so much good stuff out there that gets neglected. There's so much bad stuff that is performed.
Well, if you had to pick one piece, and this can either be kind of religious music or other kinds of music, what would you say is the one that you see the most value in that you don't think is getting the kind of exposure that it should be?
A choral piece suitable for college?
Yes.
That's a difficult question. And I don't have a answer. One piece.
Oh, you can give me more than one.
Oh. Well, I keep coming back to the better composers, right? I think that once a person can understand or thinks he or she can understand Mozart, I think that makes a big difference in his or her life. There are a number of good pieces by Mozart if you have an orchestra handy or an organ, but I do think there is some sort of what's the correct word? Ethos? Do you like that word?
I like that.
About good classical composers, that once you get into it, it makes you realize that I ain't nothing but a hound dog. It doesn't do much for you. And I know I'm going to get in trouble because there are a lot of people who imitate in their mores Elvis if they don't even look like him and show up at funny events in Las Vegas. But I guess this is the part I was talking about. A fool goes looking for the wind that motivated him earlier in his life, and it still does. And I don't listen to classical music all the time on my radio. I have a radio attached to my computer, like most of the world, and I found a station coming out of Paris called Radio Deliro, Deliro, that has a nice mixture of pop music, and they'll throw in a Mozart operatic aria of some sort. It's a wonderful mishmash, and as you know, I was a trombone player as well as a choral director. Played in the symphony, played ice shows and in the pit for traveling shows. I was the resident trombone player for Bay Barnes and his orchestra for a number of years. Played in the Old Tantilla. So it's not that I did not enjoy nor do it. I still enjoy what might be called more popular music. if that's all I had to do, I would be slightly bonkers. And on this radio station, they mix it all up, and that's the one I seem to listen to more. And of course, nobody in his right mind listens to public broadcasting during October because they're all raising money, and so I cut them off. I just don't bother with them during October. I make my annual $25 donation, and then don't pay a bit of attention to them in October. Let them do. It's more of a chore. They need a sense of humor. I have a friend of mine who worked at public radio for a while in West Virginia, and when it came time for their fundraising, a couple times a year or whatever it was, he would break out all these funny scripts and skits and things, and they let him go because they had no sense of humor. And so he's a funny, creative guy, and he knew everybody laughing, but they weren't contributing. So
No, you do need both. You need the
That's
improvement
right.
and the contribution.
Right.
So.
Okay, I think I should ask you more questions. Right? You've been dominating the questions.
Ask me a question.
Okay. Tell us about the years in between your student years here and your grand return. Where did you study and do things like that?
Well, I left Randolph-Macon. Well, I came to Randolph-Macon knowing I wanted to major in psychology.
You did?
I
Before you
did.
even got
Before
here.
I even got here, I knew that's what I wanted. I wanted to be a psychology major.
Who were
And
the psych professors here when you got here?
Carol Hughes.
Carol, good woman.
And Al Acey.
Oh, good old Al.
And Mike Warren.
That's a good group.
Yes.
That's a very different group
Yes.
among them.
Yes,
Right,
yes,
right.
all quite different, and it was a great experience. They were all wonderful. I can remember being in Carol Hughes's classes, and she did physiological psychology, and so we would be looking at pictures of rat brains and learning what they did, and
Wonderful.
it was wonderful. And then I'd be in Al Acey's class, and I don't even remember why. I just remember suddenly he did jumping jacks in the front of the class, and I can't remember what concept he was trying to explain.
your attention.
It got my attention. I remember the jumping jacks. And then Mike Warren was doing research in an area I wanted to do research in, and I got to do research with him. And I didn't find this out until I came back to Randolph-Macon. My very first publication is based on work that I did with Mike Warren. I didn't even know he'd published it. He published it under his name and my name while I was
Your
gone.
name, too.
My name,
What a
too.
guy.
I
What a
know.
guy.
It was a
What a
great
guy.
guy. So my first professional publication is based on the work
you
I
did
did
here.
here as a senior at Randolph-Macon. So that was great.
What was that about?
It was about memory and looking at, there was a theory called levels of processing and trying to determine how, I know you don't actually want to hear this, I'm going to tell you anyway, it's how what you're doing when you first encounter the information, how that has an impact on what you're more likely to remember. So we were
That's valuable
testing.
stuff.
Yes, exactly. It is valuable
It's
stuff.
valuable stuff. Bores the bejesus out of me, but it's valuable stuff.
Yes. So I won't make you listen to the details. So
No, it's all right.
no, that's all right. And so that's what we were doing. And so I went to graduate school at the University of Maryland because they had a program in cognitive psychology, which was associated with that kind of thing and with language. I had taken a psycholinguistics course with Professor Hasker, which was also a wonderful course.
What kind of course? I never know.
Psycholinguistics in the English department with Professor Hasker.
Yeah, I got to tell you about Hasker when
Tell
you're
me
finished.
about Hasker.
No,
Okay, all right.
You went to Maryland.
I went to Maryland. I'll go quickly because I want to hear this story about Hasker. So I went to Maryland and got a PhD, still working on language and on memory. Then I went to New York and taught for 3 years at Manhattanville College. And then Carol Hughes called me and told me they had a position at Randolph-Macon, and I came to talk to them about it, and I came back.
That's lovely.
Yes.
That's
So
lovely.
quickly, tell me about this. Tell me the Hasker story.
I have often said to some of my friends who have known me a long time that my liberal education began after I got to Randolph-Macon as a teacher. You mentioned the old chapel. my office, a new thing up in the corner of the upstairs, was also the same building that housed Gertrude Sloan, who was the alumni secretary. And right next to Gertie's office was a little kitchen, because that wing of the old chapel was at that time called Alumni Hall. And so there were a couple rooms for visiting firemen and so forth. And there's a little kitchen downstairs. Of course, that means that it was a wonderful place to have coffee breaks. And Gertie Sloan, who was near retirement when I got here, a wonderful woman, a wonderful memory. She tried to learn every freshman's first name.
Wow.
So that she could follow them through, and as they became alumni, she would be able to say, "Oh, yes," and she was very good at that. Well, Gertie Sloan had a little coffee group, including Flavia Owen, right, who used to be the head knocker in the library here, Hasker, who is the... Now, if you want curmudgeonliness, he's the guy. Hasker and McElwain, right?
Both of them.
Sometimes T. McKnight or Simpson. We're really going back here. The footnotes are going to be long on this one. Harris Kessler, recently passed away, was a Methodist minister. Sometimes Lambeth Clark, who went from Randolph-Macon to that little school of his down Tidewater, right? And this was, in effect, although it was not that snobbish, this was, you had to be invited.
To coffee.
Well, to be nice about it. You just didn't barge in and say, "Where's my cup of coffee?" And so we got to talking. They invited me in. I don't know what they saw in me that deserves to be in such rarefied air. I really don't, still don't, but they invited me in. And these people knew their classical music, and of course with 2 English professors there, 3 including Lambeth, they knew, and the level of conversation was immediately above my head. I might note some Mozart pieces, but when Gertie and Flavia started talking about the Mozart violin sonatas, about which I knew nothing at the time, I said, "Ooh, these folks know what they're doing. They know." And then I always been interested in reading books like anybody does, and Hasker and McElwain took me on the wing and said, "Now you got to read this book, you got to read this one, and you got to read this author, everything you can." And I would do it, and they said, "Oh, you read him in the wrong order." And gee whiz, you should have known better than to start with that book. And so, at least from a attitude toward the arts and literature, I learned a lot the first 5 or 6 years I was at Randolph-Macon, just from associating with these very important colleagues, some staff members, some ministers, some faculty members, of course. But they were a wonderful group, and I was really favored even to share some coffee with them at times. The coffee rarely was that good, by the way, but that's beside the point.
Well, we're almost out of time. Buster, do you have any final thoughts that you want to share with posterity?
Alva, I've already written my obit, and it's on file here at the college to make sure that, I'll be 75 next month. So it ain't going to last forever. The slings and arrows of cruel aging have not escaped me. All right, so it ain't going to last forever. But at the end of the obit, I'm leaving it with this little phrase ending with the four dot, 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 dot. You know, and it's from an old Peggy Lee song. If that's all there is, let's keep on dancing. And the older I get, that's the way I feel, you know. A lot of this, what has happened, etc. But let's have a good time. I now drink, when I can afford it on my measly pension, better scotch than I did in those days. So that's my own contribution to Let's Keep on Dancing. All right. Now, what have you got to say, youngster?
I'm not sure I have any final thoughts except to say Randolph-Macon is a wonderful place to work. It is nothing like what I thought it would be like as a student. I mean, there are real differences in being here as a faculty member as opposed to being a student. Being a student, you get to just kind of experience the wonder, and you don't have to do as much with the struggles of how to make sure that the wonder can continue. So I have real respect for what the faculty members who were here when I was a student must have been having to do to make my experience as positive as it was. And I guess I don't feel quite like a youngster anymore. I'm 48, Buster. I'm 48. I know, but I'm 48. So I don't feel like a youngster, but I'm committed to making sure that my students get to keep
tenure?
Dancing too. I have tenure.
Oh, good.
Yes. So yeah, we'll keep dancing and keep
story.
trying to. Oh, so I should have asked you that. Maybe next time. So, thank you.
Thank you so much, Alva Hughes and Buster Ward.